I think maybe we should kick off with just a few of the news updates that have
Yeah.
come through while we've been on air. Um, First of all, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a short video, according to the Associated Press, after the latest round of explosions in Lebanon. He said, I have already said we will return the residents to the north safely to their homes, and that is exactly what we will do. Lebanon's health ministry, as I said at the beginning, says that at least 9 people were killed and 300 injured by the second wave of device explosions that occurred today, of course, after the pages exploded yesterday. Israel's army chief says Israel has drawn up plans for additional actions against Hezbollah and is ready to strike. Quote, we have many capabilities that we have not yet activated, Lieutenant General 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 said after approving new operational plans at Israel's Northern Command on Wednesday. And yeah, there's more, but things are moving rapidly, and we don't know if this is the prelude. And then, of course, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, has said that the weight of Israeli activity is moving from Gaza to the north. That doesn't necessarily mean things are going to get any better for people in Gaza. Israel is still maintaining the genocidal siege and starvation. But I think of notable interest is that over the last few days in Israel, there were reports that Yoav Gallant was going to be replaced by Gideon Sa'ar, another Likud politician. And what's so interesting is you'll recall that a couple of weeks ago we were talking about how Yoav Gallant was opposed to a broader operation on the northern front in Lebanon, saying, Israel basically couldn't do it. The moment had passed. And once threatened with being fired by Netanyahu, all of a sudden Yoav Gallant is singing the tune of let's go to war with Lebanon, basically.
Right. And reiterating the war goal. Now, Gallant and now Netanyahu have echoed each other, saying that one of their major war goals is getting their settlers out of the hotels in Tel Aviv and getting them back to the northern cities and towns, which sounds like a fever dream at this point. But this is Israel's this is kind of par for the course for their completely sociopathic war strategies based on, of course, terrorism and psychological ops and genocide. I mean, how, yesterday when we were all getting news that Israel had started these terror attacks of simultaneously blowing up people's pagers, Craig Mokhiber, who's been on this program a few times, he's the former UN official, he said that this is the opening of a dangerous new chapter in global terrorism and likely provoking a wider war in the region. And then today, as we mentioned, a new wave of these exploding communications devices happened a couple hours ago, walkie-talkies. What does this mean? What do these terrorist attacks by Israel on people of Lebanon mean for this wider expanding war, mean for these war plans of resettling the north of occupied historic Palestine? What can we say?
Well, we can say that that Hezbollah is going to switch it up. Fundamentally, they're going to reevaluate all of their security systems, which would set them up in a better position for the war than having found this out now, which I think leads to the suspicion that Hezbollah had outed this network and that Israel was just playing its last card to both destroy the devices, to destroy evidence, but also to get their last play their last card, where you blow off the hands of a bunch of bureaucrats, or you You get to see who goes into the hospitals, to see who Hezbollah is, to see who's carrying these in their backpacks, because they didn't know who the 3,000 pagers were going to go to ahead of time, right? Hezbollah distributed these pagers after Israel embedded these explosives into these devices. So they get some intelligence from that, and it opens up a lot of questions, right? Like the assassination of Fouad Shukr happened in a place that I think really surprised Hezbollah. And I think that you'd have to ask the question of how long has this breach been in place? And if we remember, it's just anecdotal at this point, but we'll remember that Fouad Shukr was assassinated because he got a page to go up to a floor in the building that he was in, and he went up to that floor and he was hit on that floor with the missile. That's just an anecdotal piece of information from that, but that stuck out in my head as soon as we heard about this, because the first question, I think, is how long has this been going on, right? How did they do it? And I think we have some answers to those questions. I think you guys have some answers to it, but I think in reality, to use an explosive like PETN, which was used in like the shoe bomber, it's very difficult to detect. It's highly explosive, many-fold more explosive than RDX and TNT, and you only need a small amount of it, a very small amount of it, to do serious damage. And so that would allow it to be, to the question, how did it get through Hezbollah security? They must have taken them all apart and looked at them. And you would have seen anything like plastic explosives or anything like that, you would have identified them. Or if it weighed more ounces than you expected. But when you use this fine powder, I think Hezbollah just got caught on this one. And
so it was, I mean, what we know, we don't know obviously, but it's most likely that this was done in a supply chain sort of transaction somewhere along the way before it got into Lebanon.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of reporting on that over the last 24 hours, and different companies named in different countries, in Hungary and Taiwan, and they've come out and denied it. And, which they would, but on the other hand, they might be telling the truth. This was clearly, I mean, it has to be said, this was clearly a major security breach and an achievement for Israeli intelligence. It's a tactical achievement. Strategically, though, it doesn't change very much. John, you were referring to the reporting from Al Monitor, which is saying that Israel, because there's been a lot of discussion about why they would do it now. Is this part of a sort of programmed and deliberate escalation, or is it, as Al Monitor is reporting, that Israel feared that Hezbollah was about to discover this breach, and they set off the devices now for fear of being exposed or to take advantage of them? And I think one thing I thought about, even though we don't know all the answers, I mean, if you go back, there are all these books written over the last few decades about the Mossad and the Israeli intelligence. Some of them written by sort of insiders or people close to the Mossad, and you can't always tell what's myth and what's real and what's sort of aggrandizement. But the Mossad has a long history, and this is really not in dispute, of setting up front companies and front organizations around the world to achieve its goals, and that these companies may operate as, in a sense, legitimate businesses, trading and doing business until they're needed to carry out some kind of sophisticated operation. So that just gives us some context. Whether something like that happened here, we don't know all the answers yet.
The tech supply chain is extremely complicated, more so than other supply chains. There's a lot of chance for vulnerability in that system, and as we've seen with the evidence that's come out, the initial company said, "Oh, we don't actually make them. This other company makes them," and the other company said, "We don't actually. We license it to this other company." and that's part of the supply chain. And as we know, going back to Edward Snowden, this technology supply chain attacks on these kind of devices, our technology devices, have been a decades-long program to have them be in the manufacturing process, not inserted, but to have them built, ready-made, and then sealed into the computer that they're shipping off. Not screwing it open and putting something in. They're embedding them in the process, and that has been something that the NSA has been doing.
And this is something, and this is something that Tamara, I'm going to drop this tweet in the chat if we can put it up. That is from Mohammad Marandi, the Iranian analyst who we've had on the program a couple of times, and he says in this tweet. He says, do not purchase electronic goods produced in the US, Canada, UK, EU, Australia, Taiwan, New Zealand, Japan, or Korea. Do not purchase Western brands that are produced anywhere in the world. They can be weaponized against you and your families. Now, I don't know how practical that is for a lot of us because, we don't have necessarily have a lot of choices, but that is certainly a sentiment that will resonate in a lot of the world, particularly outside the West, where I think people are going to become much more mistrustful of, Western or Western branded technology.
It's such a gross operation to see there when they're just in a shopping mall, just shopping.
The children everywhere. I mean,
take a look. And I think this is worth showing because of just the glee that we're seeing in Western media. I'll drop another tweet in.
Ali, can you talk about this? The way that Zionists and Israelis are talking about what happened, as well as the Western media.
Yeah, let's take a look at this tweet from this is from actually a journalist at Declassified UK, John McAvoy. Of course, we had Matt Kennard from Declassified UK on last week, and this is just a clip of the reporting. I'm not sure which, I'm not sure which publication, but presumably some mainstream publication. And
looks like the New York Times.
Right. Okay. That's what it was. Fatima was in the kitchen on Tuesday when a pager on the table began to beep. Her aunt said she picked up the device to bring it to her father and was holding it when it exploded, mangling her face and leaving the room covered in blood. She said Fatima was trying to take courses in English. Ms. Musawi said she loved English. So again, you can see how indiscriminate this is, even though those who are supporting this attack are trying to spin it as some very sophisticated and targeted operation. And another genre, which perhaps not so much from journalists, although there may be journalists, but you see this from a lot of supporters of Israel, is they're sort of gleefully claiming that a lot of people were castrated by this. So they're sort of reveling in this as a form of sexual violence. Do put that tweet from Leila Al-Arian back up, please, Tamara. And this makes a point that John alluded to, that this is, Leila, who we have also had on the live stream to talk about media coverage of the genocide. Leila, of course, who made that brilliant documentary about the genocide in Gaza for Al Jazeera, and we talked about that with her on the program. And she says she's highlighting this tweet from a Sky News journalist who's quoting a surgeon in Lebanon saying that many patients he's treating following the pager explosion have life-changing injuries, and added, it's a massacre. Whoever did this is a war criminal. And Leila comments, this is what other journalists would call really cool tech. And we've seen a lot of reporting like that, talking about how sophisticated. And here's one, the next one from Patrick Kingsley of the New York Times. That's a tweet from, let me drop this in. Yeah, there you go. That Leila highlighted. This is from Patrick Kingsley in the New York Times. Though the attack on Tuesday was an eye-catching demonstration of Israel's technological prowess.
Ugh.
And so we see
Yeah.
this kind of just awe that journalists have. And this really reminds me of a genre I'd noticed in reporting on Ukraine, on the war in Ukraine, even before the genocide in Gaza started. And Tamara, you could show that one. So this is an example from the Daily Beast. Ukrainians invent homemade war machine to gun down Russians. So there's a whole, and we can show the next one there as well. There's a whole genre. If you read this New York Times article, it's talking about how clever Ukrainians are to fit explosives to racing drones and guide them with great skill at Russian targets. And there's another one we can show, Tamara. The MacGyvered weapons in Ukraine's arsenal. So again, there's this whole genre of Western journalism that praises the ingenuity of the plucky underdog. But of course, what we've seen from John's reporting over the last year is that the local groups in the region, whether they're Palestinian or Lebanese groups, I'm not saying names to not trigger the algorithm, perhaps, are very ingenious in their use of technology, including racing drones, including what we saw right at the beginning from October 7th, being able to drop grenades from drones right onto an Israeli tank, not onto an Israeli kindergarten, onto an Israeli tank. And they are never treated this way by the Western media.
No, I don't think clever has ever been applied to anything.
No, and so this massive,
the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they run a site, a Twitter site that's called Israel. It's run by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. 10 minutes after the pagers started blowing up, they put out a tweet with a row of flags that said, "If you're a proud Zionist, retweet." Right at that moment, journalist with the state broadcaster, Israeli Arab affairs journalist with their Khan News state broadcaster, he put out the Hezbollah martyr posters that they put out, the dignified martyr posters that they put out right away for their lost fighters. They don't hide it like Israel. And he made a joke and put a pager on his head, like a professional state media journalist mocking an attack on largely civilians out in civilian society. They didn't send these off at at a certain time at night. They could have blown them up in many different ways, and they chose this way. They chose 3:30 p.m. when people are out of work, walking through the streets, picking up their kids from school, and then today they double tapped it at the funeral of the people who were killed the day before, and they cheer it. They're so unhinged.
Yeah.
And this tweet I made just a little bit before the program with some screenshots from Al Jazeera that I want to show. I put that in the live stream chat, Tamara, because again, these walkie-talkies today that blew up, and it's been reported by Al Jazeera and from Lebanese sources that these were ICOM, made by a company called ICOM V82 walkie-talkies that are used by first responders. And if we zoom in on that first image, Tamara, the one on the left, this is Carmen Joukhadar, the Al Jazeera correspondent. This was an exclusive report, and she was in the home of a rescue worker in the village of Burj Rahal in southern Lebanon. And you can see in the background there are women and children in that house. This is a house of 15 people. And in the second photo, you can see the damage caused in this house just to the right of where she's standing. And that's just a bit of it. The camera scans around, but these are stills I took of the devastation to the house by this exploding walkie-talkie, which is used by a first responder in Lebanon. It's not very clear in this image, but you can see in the bottom right there, that's his actual fireman's uniform. And you could read clearly, you can't see it in this image, but you could read clearly that he was a member of the fire brigade, and he had a walkie-talkie for his work as a fireman. and they blew up the walkie-talkie in his house, full of women and children, full of civilians. That's what happened today. So it's important to know this when you're reading these Western media reports that are effectively praising this as a pinpoint operation targeting Hezbollah. This was an indiscriminate attack that certainly hit a lot of people associated with Hezbollah, but it hit and put at risk a lot of civilians who had no idea what danger they were carrying around with them or exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Rania Halek, our colleague and contributor to the Electronic Intifada, has said that Israel turned people into bombs. I mean, in any other definition, this would be called terrorism, state terrorism, and yet the New York Times, the New York Post, Wall Street Journal, they're all saying, wow, yeah, like as you said, what a plucky, ingenious, innovative, clever, operation by Israel.
On that, tomorrow, if you could put up the TRT World graphic, we could see the illustration of that, like just exactly how people were turned into walking bombs. Look, these are the pages that are said to have been exploded everywhere, and you can just see the impact that it would make on people. And this is said to be the company. This is the Taiwanese company, which has denied that it came from them. But I guess we'll learn more about that in the coming days.
Well, Ali, I also wanted to ask you, kind of analytically, like the reactions on social media by the Israeli public to this, and I thought you had a lot of interesting insight into that.
It's clear, like with the assassinations of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 and Ismail Haniyeh, that Israelis, including Israeli leaders, not just the public, see these types of attacks as achievements in themselves, as victories in themselves. What they don't point to is any kind of strategic vision. I mean, the assassinations of Fuad Shukr, the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, these attacks are clearly tactical successes on Israel's part. I don't think anyone could deny that. But, as our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy asked in a recent analysis, a brilliant analysis that she wrote at the Electronic Intifada, what is Israel's end game? Where do they lead? There is no logical connection between these actions and Israel becoming, a safe, secure country for the people who live in it. There's no way that this type of operation is going to bring Israeli settlers back to the north, as Netanyahu says, and nor would any kind of conventional war. It would only ensure that more Israelis have to leave their homes. So what is Israel's strategic vision other than just to spread murder and mayhem and to escalate in the hope perhaps that the United States will be drawn in? And the U.S. officials, although, let's be clear, they enable and assist all of Israel's crimes, at the same time, they're saying escalation to a full-scale war with Lebanon would not serve Israel. They don't seem to have any faith that the Israeli military would do any better against Hezbollah than it did in 2006. It would almost certainly do a lot worse. And, the Israeli military, I know that they were outside John's deadline for today, but there were probably John will talk about them next week. But we saw operations from Qassam in eastern Rafah today, attacking troop carriers, destroying and capturing a D9 bulldozer. This is in eastern Rafah, the first part of Rafah that the Israeli military entered. When was that, John? 4 months ago?
Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, May 7th.
May 7th. So So it's now, June, July, August, September. It's almost 5 months ago,
50
and the
days.
Israeli army cannot secure the eastern outskirts of Rafah. How are they going to do against Hezbollah? So that's the question: is what's the strategic vision? And remember, the U.S. said Rafah, don't go into Rafah.
Right. It was a
The
red
Western
line.
countries
Yeah.
said it's a red line. Well, they're saying the same about Lebanon now. They're saying that don't launch a full scale war with Lebanon. But is that going to stop Israel? Is that going to stop this conflagration getting bigger and bigger? History doesn't suggest it will.
Right. Right. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else that we know? Any other analyses that we can kind of offer at this at this chaotic time about what's happening in Lebanon? And I mean, as you mentioned, John, the Said Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, it was already scheduled to speak tomorrow. Um, I mean, the escalation is anything can happen between now and then. But what should we be watching maybe right now?
Well, it didn't seem to me that those were assassination devices. Those seemed to me to be kill switch devices that would injure people and are sick and terrorism. But they didn't seem like assassination devices. They seemed to be built in a way that, the numbers, they killed children. They probably killed a few people that were in, a compromising position or hit them in a certain way. But out of 3,800 of these to go off, the kill numbers are low. So it does seem to me as though they were in the network getting the data, and then this is their kill switch to destroy the device, to destroy the way that the device was, built and how it worked, so that when Hezbollah, which is immediately started reconstructing what's going on here, or maybe, as we've said a couple times, that Hezbollah outed it and that this was their last chance. Their last chance is they're not going to get any more good data. And so what they do is they blow up all of the pagers, and then you track and see who goes to what hospitals. You track and see which person you didn't think was Hezbollah or would have a Hezbollah pager. But the people that we're seeing, we're seeing bureaucrats. We're not seeing, maybe they're
Medics,
hiding. Yeah, medics. We're seeing people on buses and in grocery stores. We're not seeing Radwan forces on the front line being assassinated and having a deadly impact. There has been some impact of assassinations that this seems to suggest that they have been in the system and the system worked. I think the assassination of Fouad Shukr is right from the minute it happened. We were, how did that happen? Because that system is supposed to be airtight, and it didn't appear to be airtight. But yeah, Hezbollah is just going to react to that and change up all of their systems. So Israel loses whatever advantage they had by tracking that data. Maybe they've tracked the data to particular launch sites, to particular to people that they didn't know were connected to who or who. But once you shake that system up, that information is degraded in value. And then to just do it on the second day with the walkie-talkies just seems like Israel trying to be that, like, mad dog in the Middle East, right? Like, so crazy that you don't want to mess with them. That thing that they've been doing for 50 or 75 years.
And it doesn't work, though. I mean, it doesn't work. That's the point,
opposite, right? The point you
it
made.
does the opposite. I mean, this is the point: is that the madder a dog Israel makes itself, the greater the determination of people in the region to get it out of the region, like a Rhodesia or like an apartheid South Africa. that this is a foreign entity that has no place here, that we can never be safe, we can never develop peacefully while this enemy is among us. That is the conviction that grows, and you have to put this in that bigger context, that the resistance has never been stronger. Yes, as Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, said in his speech a few weeks ago, we're not at the same level him speaking for Hezbollah, that Hezbollah is not at the same military level. We don't have parity with Israel. And I commented at the time that I thought it was interesting that he emphasized that, because I think he wanted to give people a sort of a reality check about expectations. That doesn't in any way limit the determination of the resistance, and it is clearly making advances all the time. But my point here is that the bet on accommodating Israel and saying, okay, let's just let bygones be bygones and have the Abraham Accords and we all sign peace treaties, that's just not a viable strategy. And the regimes that have done that are feeling, increasingly uncomfortable, let's say, because the people are with the resistance across the region.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are always, within every society, there's a class of people or a segment of the society whose interests are tied to the, imperial or neo-imperial power. That's a given. But Israel is not making itself any friends, let's say.
Right.
And he was saying they don't have parity in weapons, right? They don't have billions of dollars being given to them by the US. They don't have diplomatic support in all of these environments to carry on a political war. That's true. But they can defeat Israel in a war, no question. No question. If Israel wants to open a war with Hezbollah, Hezbollah can win that war.
Absolutely. Well, which they did in 2006, and we've seen again. Not to go over the same ground. The Israeli military, again, we have to always highlight this distinction: murdering civilians, blowing children to pieces isn't difficult. Anyone with a warplane can do that. What Israel has been unable to achieve is control over any inch of Gaza. There is resistance in every part of Gaza, and week after week, the claims from the Israeli military and political leadership, oh, we've destroyed Hamas, we've destroyed the Al-Quds brigades, that proves to be nonsense. So that's where
we are. And in the West Bank as well. Yeah. All right. Well, of course, we'll continue to keep watching.
And of course, I believe that Nasrallah is making a speech.
Yeah.
It may be tomorrow, but certainly in the next couple of days. And this will be one of the
local
5 p.m.
tomorrow,
right?
Okay. Thursday. I'll be watching, and everyone across the region and around the world will be watching too. This is clear. And I think another message that we get from this Israeli operation, that I think people who have to make the heavy decisions about how to react will be looking at, is that restraint doesn't work with, it's a dilemma. It's a catch-22, because all of the groups, again, I'm avoiding the names here to not trigger the algorithm, but all the groups have said, we don't want a bigger war. Yemen has said we don't want a bigger war. Iran has said we don't want a bigger war. What we want is an end to the genocide, and that our actions will stop when the genocide stops, and when the Palestinian people stop being murdered by Israel. But that's the dilemma, because any form of restraint, or anything that appears to be restraint, only encourages Israel to be more aggressive and more like a mad dog. And I think this is another example of that, frankly.